Chapter 17 of Miss Pym's Camouflage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Miss Pym's Camouflage by Lady Dorothy Stanley. Chapter 17. After hours and hours of dreary flat country, darkness closed down, and Miss Pym was dozing when she suddenly awakened to find it was Berlin at last. Slowly the train steamed into the great station, even at that late hour thronged with people, because trains now were very few and far between. People therefore waited in crowds, submissive as cattle. All the railway officials and porters, Miss Pym noticed, were women disguised as men. It now seemed advisable to become invisible. There were many spies stalking about the station, those ridiculous Prussian spies, recognizable as such all over Berlin. Miss Pym was glad to be free. It seemed delightful to move about and to go where she pleased. She crossed the Spree, a slow-flowing, dull stream, spanned by ugly bridges, and soon found herself in wide, ill-lighted streets of extremely lofty houses. The Wilhelmstrasse appeared to her miles long, though it spread out at intervals into Plätze and Gartens, with the great Brandenburg Gate opening from the Tiergarten into the famous Allee unter den Linden. Berlin was undoubtedly a city of fine buildings and multitudinous statues. It all seemed very big and mysterious in the moonlight, and even at that hour gave an impression of wealth and prosperity. The monumental piles of palaces and official residences, the magnificent cafes and restaurants, although these were closed, all contributed to give that solid effect of riches, of bigness, as though the very bulk of the buildings were an asset. It was only later in the sunshine that she saw the real Berlin, the people walking listlessly, in mourning, anxious and downcast. In the shops, sham foods were exhibited, barrels of butter tinted to the life, sham margarine, sausages of painted wood, and eggs of polished chalk. Many women of the middle class went in sandals, and others wore boots with wooden soles. Miss Pym was struck by the melancholy and pallor of the faces. Many women carried nets which held half a cabbage, or one turnip, or a piece of smoked fish. They were all prowling about with the same obsession, the hunt for food, something cheap, satisfying, and palatable. The contrast was striking. These palatial buildings all bearing the aspect of immense wealth, and these miserable inhabitants. The streets were very quiet, owing to the absence of traffic. Trams were running, but at long intervals. Motors had disappeared, with the exception of military motors and motor ambulances, but these latter took side streets and usually passed at dusk. Miss Pym felt sure that she would find accommodation in one of the big hotels. The Adlon looked grand and quiet. Bed and board here must be the best obtainable. So Miss Pym entered, and finding a lift about to ascend, made her way to the 4th floor. Treading richly carpeted corridors, she tried in vain to enter the rooms. Every place was locked. In a service room she found a German girl telling her fortune with a greasy old pack of cards. On the table beside her was the master key of the rooms. Possessed of the key, Miss Pym walked the length of the corridor, turned sharp to the left down another long corridor, and opened at hazard number 95. It was occupied. In every room she visited she found luggage, or people. On the 4th floor there was not a free room. It then occurred to Miss Pym that probably the more expensive rooms on the 1st and 2nd floors would be untenanted. So she descended and entered, on the 1st floor, a princely suite, bedroom, bathroom, salon, hung with silk, a nouvelle art bed of mahogany and brass, quite a Junker apartment. Miss Pym locked her 2 bags in a magnificent Boule chest of drawers, and decided to indulge in the luxury of a hot bath. A luxury it was indeed, taking away the sensation of depression and fatigue. Then she lay on a silken couch, meditating on her next move. So far, she had done nothing of any value to England. She must lose no time on the morrow to make good. Perhaps a visit to the palace of the General Staff in the Tiergarten would be productive. At any rate, she might hear where von Hindenburg was to be found. Next she would visit the different ministries, and see the Chancellor, etc. Early the next day she wandered out into the fine Linden Avenue, past the Crown Prince's palace, the Opera House, the Kaiser's palace, the innumerable fine buildings, palatial if not palaces, through the Brandenburg Gate to the Königsplatz. Here she ventured to ask a woman whether the Kaiser was in Berlin. The woman shook her head. "He is seldom here now," she replied. Miss Pym continued, "I am a Swiss, on a visit here for the first time. Berlin is a fine city." "Oh, yes, it is a fine city, but you are here at a terrible time. Do the Swiss people think the peace will come soon? They say those wicked English people are preventing peace, the peace our emperor offers." "I cannot say when peace will come," replied Miss Pym, "but I have heard that the Allies talk of dictating the terms of peace. In Switzerland it is known that the Germans started this war." "Which shows how the enemy lies," replied the woman. "I hope our new Chancellor and our submarines will soon bring them to reason." "Is von Hindenburg in Berlin?" asked Miss Pym. "That I cannot tell you. Some say he has gone east, others that he has gone west. He is not nearly as popular as he was." "What is that big building over there? It looks like a museum." "No, it is the palace of the General Staff. The War Office and the Admiralty are away back by the Potsdam Gate, quite near what was the British Embassy. To think of our allowing those horrible people to reside within a stone's throw of our War Office." "Thank you. It is very kind of you directing me. Tomorrow I must visit your museums. Tell me, where have I the best chance of getting a good dinner?" The woman was doubtful. "They say there are secret places where rich people can dine well. If that is true, it is a wicked shame, for we are all suffering most terribly. I go to the public kitchens with my cards, but the very poor cannot afford the 50 pfennigs. If you visited the underground people, you would soon realize what Berliners are suffering." "Who are the underground people?" "Why, the thousands of poor folk who live in cellars without means of heating. It comes to this. The poor of Berlin are without fires, food, or light." "Why don't the people rise up against the Kaiser?" "Why? The All-Highest grieves for us. But what can he do? He must defend his country. It is the English we must punish. From all accounts, their punishment is already severe. They are starving. That is our one joy. There is a good restaurant in Markgrafenstrasse, von Bergen's, but, of course, I cannot tell you anything about the food. Restaurants are not for such as I." Miss Pym thanked the woman and retraced her steps along the Linden, then turning down Charlottenstrasse, entered the street where she was to find the excellent restaurant. She knew that it was hopeless to ask for a meal without the various tickets, so slipping off her visibility, she passed into von Bergen's restaurant, and choosing a small table in a recess, she went to the dining room at the back. In wartime dinners were served early, and already there were habitués, with serviettes tied round their necks, clamoring for soup. Miss Pym secured a plateful, which she carried off to her table with a piece of war bread. In this way she helped herself to a sufficient meal without interference. It was dull sitting there alone, but the morrow should prove interesting, and this short respite was not altogether unwelcome, as it enabled her to make her plan of campaign. After a long rest in her sumptuous suite at the Adlon, she returned at 7 o'clock to dine at von Bergen's, and then decided to visit a kinema. There were many, so she chose the one where the crowded entrance testified to the popularity of the show, a typical German crowd, where the men elbowed their way rudely, trod upon women's feet without apology, and even pushed them aside with violence. Miss Pym paid for a good place, and found herself in a glittering hall, all white and gold paint, and brilliantly illumined by electric lights. At a piano was an old lady. An old man fiddled, and a child played on a cello. A nervous, shabby little German lent Miss Pym his programme. "I love to see the English prisoners on the film," he said excitedly. "I have been to this show 3 times already. It revives my flagging hopes. You will see the submarining of a proud English ship. Such pictures, being facts, are better than all the newspapers, for to tell you the truth," he added, looking round timidly, "I am beginning to doubt some of the victories our papers speak of. Oh, not all, of course, but some of them do not seem convincing. Here, however, we see the actual occurrence." Miss Pym glanced at the programme. Decidedly she was to see the humiliation of the British that evening. "Is the Kaiser in Berlin?" she inquired. "No, he is at Potsdam, resting, for he has been making speeches of encouragement to his troops on every front, and they say he is quite exhausted. Hindenburg sent him because our men showed signs of discouragement. Can it be wondered at? But we must not believe all the dreadful things we hear. That is why I come to this show. It revives my depressed spirits, and does not cost much," he added with a sigh. "Do you expect an early peace?" inquired Miss Pym. "Why, certainly. There is a congress now going on at Cologne to consider the terms we shall impose. The All-Highest is also arranging a congress at Stockholm, not, of course, in his own name, but he settled it all in Russia. He considered it wiser to have it appear democratic. It is like a big lump of cheese in a mousetrap, that democratic talk." And the little German gave a mirthless cackle, as he took off his spectacles and wiped them. "You see," he continued, "at the beginning of this war, undoubtedly, we were wanting in diplomacy. We were frank and brusque. Now we have learnt our lesson, and we are all things to all men. Our Kaiser on occasion encourages democratic talk, and Herr Scheidemann is patted on the back. We speak of fraternal love to the Russians, but they are nasty brutes, and we don't love them at all, any more than the Servians, for whom we have absolute detestation. But diplomacy demands many sacrifices. Pardon me, Fraulein, you are not German?" "No, I am Swiss. I am here for a short visit. I wanted to see the Kaiser, the Crown Prince, the Chancellor, Grand Admiral von Tirpitz, all the great people one reads about." The little German cackled again. "Well, you could see the Chancellor. He is going to the Admiralty at 11 o'clock, and returns to the Chancellery half an hour later, where there is to be a council. Probably von Tirpitz will be there, and many important personages. Michaelis is considered rather reactionary, but he is an able man, undoubtedly an able man. If you stand outside the Chancellery, you will catch sight of him. The kinema pictures were well done. Scene after scene was depicted, exhibiting the tenderness, the generosity, the chivalry of the German, followed by magnificent instances of their valor. 3 Germans standing against 50 Englishmen, all dancing round the Germans with bayonets fixed, unable, for some reason or other, to hurt the Germans. The last scene fairly roused the house. The 3 Germans kill 20 Englishmen, and the remaining 30 surrender, crying, "Have pity, comrades." It was a mistake in a succeeding film to show some of the men who had been Englishmen before, this time very unmistakable Germans. Miss Pym drew the attention of her neighbour to that fact. "See, that stout man with the scar along his cheek. Well, just now he was an English prisoner. These pictures are all made up." But Miss Pym found that there are none so blind as those who will not see. "Madame, you are mistaken. That German has a fine countenance. He could not look like a pig dog. But wait, you will see thousands of British prisoners crossing a bridge, with German officers in charge." Miss Pym's heart sank when she saw only too clearly a long line of our brave boys advancing across a bridge, accompanied by masses of German soldiers armed to the teeth. As the film unrolled, the public became uncontrollably excited. They cheered, they yelled, some stood up on the benches waving their hats. The music played in time with the tramp of feet, and then it dawned on Miss Pym that these British prisoners were being marched and remarched in endless procession across that bridge, the same men, though of course in different attitudes, and she realized that these exhausted, wounded men were being thus maltreated and humiliated that the German public might imagine they represented thousands. "Shall we have to feed all those prisoners?" asked a little girl of her mother, a hard-visaged Frau who sat next to Miss Pym. "Oh, no, or so little it doesn't count. If their countrymen like to feed them, well and good. We are indifferent. If they die of hunger, it's their lookout. I suppose they are very bad, really, those English, but they have nice faces," said the child. "Oh, hush, you bad girl. Never let me hear you say such a thing," said her mother angrily. The little girl was silent for a while, then she began questioning again. "Little mother, tell me, do those wicked English ever take our soldiers prisoner?" "Sometimes, not often. Yes, sometimes our brave men are taken prisoners by the English." "And do they starve our men?" asked the child. "No, I have not heard that they starve them. Your Uncle Heinrich is a prisoner in England. He asked us not to send food. He says he is well fed. But ought we, then, to starve their men?" "Oh, Dora, you tease me with such foolish questions. Don't you see the difference between your own people and pig dogs? Those poor prisoners in England are good Germans, who fought in self-defense, fought to keep a home for little Dora. The English are wicked people who made war on us, from hatred and jealousy. So do not let me hear you pity them, or you shall never again come to the kinema." Dora was silent and possibly convinced, but she continued to look at the procession of English prisoners with some tenderness. Miss Pym returned to the Adlon sick at heart. The horror of living amid these people, false to the core, cruel or cringing, coarse and common, was indeed a revolting experience. She must hasten to do what she had undertaken, and then return as quickly as possible to England, to home, to the land of the brave and the free. As she lay down in the wonderful bed, in that sumptuous room at the Adlon, she thought with pride and love of the Allies, all united, not by violence, not by cupidity, not even by a scrap of paper, but fast bound by one ideal, one word, the password of all these peoples, freedom. End of chapter 17.